Welcome to the Speed Accelerator course. I'm so glad that you took the time to sign up for this course and sign up to the school community and that you're willing to improve your own driving, because that's where many people go wrong. They buy the fancy gear, they buy the fancy wheel, the fancy pedals, the fancy monitors, but they don't invest enough in their own driving. So you, even with a G29, even maybe something that is gear drive, you are going to be way ahead of someone who has bought all the gear and has no idea. So yes, congratulations on investing in your own driving. Now we're going to have two parts of Speed Accelerator. We're going to have Speed Accelerator Lite and then Speed Accelerator Pro. Now Lite is going to be the two first modules of the Speed Accelerator course, and we're going to cover in module 1 what is sim racing in the first place and all the basic things that you'll need to know to progress through the course. Module 2 is where we actually get properly into the driving part of things. I teach you a few techniques and just how to handle your driving overall. There is a little bonus in there at the end of Module 2, so make sure you stick around for that. Then in Module 3, we get into the more racecraft sort of stuff, so overtaking, defending, and all this sort of mid-race stuff that you experience in the middle of a race. Module 4 is more about preserving your own driving, so saving tyres, saving fuel, making sure that you're not too hard on your car. And then eventually module 5 will be the final module for now. I may add something else on about rain later on, whether that's paid or free, I have yet to decide. But for now, there's 5 modules. It's cheap to get into Speed Accelerator Pro, so I highly recommend that you do, because the price will eventually go up as I add more value to the course. So yeah, thank you again for taking the time to invest in your own driving, and we'll get right into it. Now, this is a quick disclaimer. I am making my first ever course, so the quality of the video might not be as high standard as someone who has their own video editor or etc. But the content in the course is still super valuable, so don't really pay attention to my camera quality or the audio quality. Just pay attention to what I'm really teaching you, and then you'll be all good, because you'll know how to drive like better than 90% of the other people who are just getting into sim racing. So yeah, just focus on the stuff that I'm giving you rather than the quality. A few other tips for learning effectively is, so essentially what I do to learn is I just watch everything through once. I get the seeds planted in my head, and then after that I will try to take notes and go and apply stuff one by one in the sim. So I'll watch one video and try and apply that in the sim, take notes of what's worked, what hasn't worked, and then move on to the next one after I've binged the whole thing. So yeah, that's the very basics. That's the quick disclaimer. You will improve your driving, I'm sure you will. If you don't, there is nothing to lose really at the moment. So yeah, thank you again, and we'll get right into the course. So welcome to week 1. This module will cover basically all the basics, very basics, not even of driving, just of sim racing itself. So what is sim racing? Why does it exist? Why do we do it? Is there a purpose for it? We'll cover that. The different racing sims, so there's stuff like Project Cars, Assetto Corsa, iRacing. We'll cover all of that as well. The essential equipment that you need to race, so usually it consists of a wheel and pedals, but we'll get into a few more things. Understanding racing terminology, so basically what I'm saying, you need to be able to understand that so you can soak in and take notes and put it into practice. So I'll go through the most important racing terminology. And then setting up your environment. That's a really crucial part to sim racing, making sure you're comfortable, making sure you're able to drive consistently without any distractions. We'll go through setting up your racing environment as well. And yeah, so I'll get right into it. So, what is sim racing? Essentially, it's a virtual form of motorsport. We all get together, we try to have fun together. Oftentimes it doesn't actually work out as fun, but we can still have fun in the moments of darkness. Yeah, and we just try to replicate real-life racing scenarios where we have 24-hour races, sprint races, and all these different real cars and real classes. Some cars won't be real, like Gran Turismo, I know, has a few imaginary cars. It can still act like real cars. It's a good way of learning how to race anyway. In terms of realism, sim racing is very realistic depending on the different platforms that you use. For example, iRacing, I use that to practice for my real life stuff, as well as Assetto Corsa, use that to practice for the real stuff that isn't on iRacing. So it really does help, and it is a pathway into real life motorsport if that's what you're looking to get into. It's also a great way to practice if you don't have a lot of money to go on track in real life. So it's a good way to practice for stuff in real life too. It's accessible on PC, console. Some could even say mobile. I'm in between yes and no. I know Real Racing 3 is quite good. I used to play it for a very long time, and I learned a lot of racing from that. I did really well in karting because of Real Racing 3. So yes, you can still sort of sim race on mobile, and feel free to. This video will still help you to. So now we move on to the different racing sims. Now first of all, I kind of want to explain, like some people might have a few questions, so I'll say, what even is a racing sim? Now, I guess you could say it is a program where you're trying to simulate, or the program itself is trying to simulate what you would do in real life. So, if you're driving a car and you turn left, then the car is going to turn left. And it's trying to replicate how that would handle in real life as well. In addition to that, you're trying to race against others, so it's trying to predict where the other people are around the world and trying to match up. This car is here on track, your car is here on track, and you're side by side. Basically just trying to replicate a real life racing situation through analysing data and all this other stuff that I'm not too familiar with. That's basically what a racing sim is. Now there are various different sims out there in the racing world, or sim racing world, and I'm just going to list a few. So iRacing, my preferred one. The competition is really good on iRacing. There's always someone online in most series. The variety of cars you get as well as tracks is amazing. So you can race GTs, prototypes, open wheelers, even dirt oval is another one. All the sort of dirt stuff that you usually get, even regular ovals. The variety in iRacing is just amazing, as well as the online competition. They allow you to compete with others constantly. You can just jump on in a race in 15 minutes and you'll be with another 20 people. In saying that, it is very pricey. iRacing, I've probably dumped over $600 into iRacing itself, and that's why you might want to go for something like Accelerator Corsa Competizione, which is focused on GT3, which is a very popular class. GT racing in general is quite popular for people who are learning to drive because they have the aspect of traction control and ABS in these cars, which means like traction control if you're on throttle and you're trying to turn a corner and your car slips out, that means that you're leaning into the traction control and it'll stop you from spinning out. In that sense, ACC is quite good to learn, especially it's very immersive. The sounds you get from ACC are way better than anything I've ever experienced. Then of course there's Assetto Corsa by itself. Assetto Corsa has a very low term of competition, so the competition on there is very low in terms of who's online and the sort of GT3 races and stuff. So it's usually for modders. So if you want to drive on the Japanese highway, or you want to go do some Gunsai drifting, or whatever you want to do on there, it's good to get a mod on, and it's good to play around with for people online, so you can hang out with other people, have a fun time. It's not very competition based, unfortunately. AC2 is coming out at some point. I'm not sure how they'll mix that in with the online competition again, but I'm excited to see what happens with Assetto Corsa 2. R-Factor is another one. Online competition is good there. There's quite a few people on there. However, I have my issues with R-Factor in terms of it doesn't run on a potato of a PC like iRacing does, which sort of limited me in my starting stages of sim racing, so I sort of moved away from it, as well as the driving physics can be a bit off compared to what real life drivers use. So R-Factor is another good one. I'm not pooing on R-Factor, just saying it's not really my thing. You can get mods on R-Factor, however, so people can make mods of BTCC cars and all these different touring cars, and you're able to download them and race them just like you would in Assetto Corsa, but there's an online competition aspect of it rather than none on Assetto Corsa. Project Cars is another one. Honestly, not too familiar with it. I know you can get it on console and PC, I believe. and it's got quite good online competition. However, the driving physics are a little bit off, and I think it's a little bit more controller friendly. Same as GT Sport, you can only get that on PS4 and PS5. Now it's GT7. GT7 is the newest one in the GT franchise. It is very good for learning racecraft. However, driving physics aren't quite accurate, but that's alright. I started on GT Sport before GT7 came out, and I learnt a ton, mainly from watching Super GT's videos. There's a few other ones that I can't name right now. GT Sport or GT7 is another good way to start if you're on console, or if you're on Xbox. You can say Forza Motorsport. Also not quite so accurate with the driving physics, and I've seen quite a bit of dirty racing on there. But if you can get into a clean race, it can be quite a good platform to learn sim racing on. And then eventually, if you want to move up to something like ACC or iRacing. Yeah, so there's many different sims that you can try out. So if I were to start sim racing again, I'd probably go back to the Gran Turismo franchise on, well for me it was PS4. Now I'd go on to Gran Turismo 7 on PS5. I learned a lot of Gran Turismo, a lot of racecraft, mainly through watching others, to be honest. So I would go hop onto YouTube, watch someone like Steve Alvarez Brown or Super GT, however you know him. I would just analyze his driving. How does he brake? How does he apply throttle? And that's what you're going to learn in this course. So you don't need to go onto YouTube and search up all these different techniques. I'm going to show you all the basics in sim racing right here, so you don't need to do all the scattered learning. Anyway, so I'd go back to Gran Turismo 7, learn all my racecraft there, and then once I wanted to improve my realistic driving, because the physics on Gran Turismo, they are good, but they're not quite accurate to real life anymore. So I'd go back to Gran Turismo 7, then I'd move up to something like Assetto Corsa Competizione, where the physics are a little bit more realistic. You can also get it on console as well as PC, so if you want to switch platform or stay on the same platform, that's all good. So advance your driving a little bit with the GT racing and sort of the ABS and traction control, and then if you wanted to race something like prototypes, move to iRacing. They have a very good licensing system, so even if you wanted to start on iRacing, that's perfectly fine. You could usually start in MX-5s, move on to something like GT4 racing, something like that, and then GT3, and then eventually get to prototypes. Or if you start in open wheelers straight away, you've got the Formula V and the Formula 4 championship, then you move up to something like Formula 4, Formula 3, or even the Super Formula Lights, and then you move up to the higher categories depending on what your jam is. If you like IndyCar or F1 or even Super Formula is a great category, yeah. So, but honestly, give a few sims a try. It's what I did, and I've really found my home at iRacing. But if you really like GT3 racing, start on GT7, stay on Assetto Corsa Competizione if you want. It's all up to you. Assetto Corsa itself may not be the best for online competition, but it's great for hanging out with people online and just having fun if that's what you're trying to do in sim racing. So seriously, try different sims out. Feel free to experiment and even experiment and compare which sim is better. Which sim do I prefer more? Does this suit my braking style more, or does this one suit my throttle application more? Because they do have subtle differences like that do make a difference. So yeah, experiment with sims. Feel free to try out whatever you want, and then sort of find your jam. Mine is iRacing. That's me. Yours could be Assetto Corsa Competizione or Assetto Corsa. That's you. That's all good. So, getting into the essential equipment. Now, it can be subjective from place to place or opinion to opinion. What I think you should get started in is at least a wheel and a set of pedals. Now, what I started on is a Logitech G29 with the same pedals, like G29 pedals, and they're quite good. A wheel with force feedback is much better than a wheel without force feedback. Now, if you don't know what force feedback is, essentially it is like getting feedback from the wheel itself. So if the car starts sliding, the wheel will snap back to sort of correct itself like a car would in real life. If you hit a bump or like a curb, then the wheel will vibrate and it will sort of shudder a little bit to give you that feeling that you're on a curb. It'll let you know that you're on a curb. Whereas a wheel without force feedback won't do any of that. And it may be way, way cheaper to get one of those, but honestly, the price for getting a force feedback wheel is worth it. Now, you don't have to get an expensive one. I started on a Logitech G29. Now they have the Logitech G923, and that's honestly a lot better than the G29 was. Mainly just the feedback is a lot more detailed, and the pedals especially. The brake pedal is the main one you're looking at. I'll get into more of the technique later on, but essentially in sim racing, for me at least, the stiffer the pedal is, the better, because you get more detailed sort of application and you can sort of use the technique a lot better with a stiffer pedal. So the G29 doesn't quite have a very stiff pedal and it has a weird rubber piece in between, whereas the G923 doesn't have that. It's a nice, relatively stiff pedal that can push your foot back if you want it to. In terms of platforms, now the G29 is pretty accessible on all platforms. There's, for Xbox, they have the G920, which is the equivalent of the G29, but for Xbox and PC. The G923, I believe, is only for PS4, PS5, and PC. I'm not sure if they have like a G923 variant for the Xbox yet. Might come out sometime soon. I honestly have no idea what the Xbox scene is like, unfortunately. Now, a rig. A rig isn't necessary for you to get started. However, I highly recommend it. I was jumping around from desk to desk with my G29 because I moved around a lot when I first came to New Zealand, and it was great. The accessibility of a G29 is amazing. You can literally just pack it up, take it to a new place, bolt it onto the next desk, chuck the pedals down next to the ground, and you'll be all good. Sorry, next to the wall, not the ground. However, a rig, just the consistency. Consistency is key in racing, and a rig will really, really improve that. You don't have to worry about the wheel falling off the desk or the pedals pushing too far into the wall if it's a fragile wall. You can just confidently do lap after lap after lap, exactly the same, just the way you should in sim racing, with confidence. You know nothing's going to fall apart. Now, this rig that I have here was given to me by my teammate. Thank you, Jeremy. You're a bloody legend. Because I was in a situation where I couldn't afford anything like this, and he just gave it to me because he got a new one. This one here is the Next Level GT Lite. I highly recommend this one for getting started. It's also actually very accessible. You can fold this thing up in like 2 minutes just like that. It's amazing. Chuck it in your car, take it to some other place. Maybe if you're going camping and you want to race there for some reason, that's all good. Yeah, so if you if you go to something like PC, so if you start on iRacing, for example, you probably want a PC with a decent graphics card, so something in the GTX 1080 or even RTX 20-ish range. I'm not sure about the AMD side of things, and something at least above, like an Intel i5, I think is quite good. 16 gigabytes of RAM is probably about the minimum you want. 32 gigabytes is probably around the optimum. I know iRacing, you can sort of limit the RAM that you use. I'm not quite sure about ACC or Assetto Corsa, to be honest. Now, yeah, so that's about the essential equipment that you need. If you do start on controller, that's all good. You don't have to get a wheel right away, but if you really want to get a really good experience out of sim racing, which I'm sure most of you do if you're watching this course, then I recommend, if you start on controller, that's all good. Learn the driving techniques on controller, and then you can move up to a wheel and you'll be all good. So yeah, that's essential equipment for you. Now, racing terminology. There's a lot you need to understand in sim racing and racing in general. So if you've been following racing for a while now, you probably know quite a few of these terms. However, if you're like just getting started, and just to make sure that you know and understand what I'm saying during the whole course, I'm just going to run you through a bit of a list of things that you'll need to know. So first off, we have the racing line. Usually that's the quickest line through a corner. There's the geometric racing line, which is the quickest way through a corner based on that one corner and that corner alone. Then there's the practical racing line, where you sort of calculate what comes afterwards. So if you have a hairpin and there's a long straight after that, you might want to take a different entry, so you start accelerating earlier compared to like an entry that has a lot of corner, or a corner that has a lot of corners afterwards. You might want to take that a bit differently so you can set your car up for the next corner. So there's many different racing lines. Usually the theory is from going from the outside to the apex of the corner, which is the middle of the corner, the the part of the corner where you're the closest to the inside and where you're getting the maximum rotation of the car. And then once you hit that apex, you start drifting out back to the outside of the track. This makes sure that you're keeping as much speed as you can while trying to still travel the shortest distance throughout a corner. Moving on to braking points, or braking markers as I like to call them. These are usually objects that you sort of detect at the same time as you're braking. Usually you're not supposed to brake based on feel of like, oh, I think I can brake here and I'll potentially make the corner. Usually you look out for a certain thing like a tree, a bush, or even most corners have 150 board, 100 board, and 50 board. And that's usually where your braking zone is. So if you brake at the 150 board, you make sure you can brake there every single time consistently. Even if you try a little bit later, you can see something in between the 150 and 100 board. Try braking at that, and just it really aids in consistency is what I'm trying to say here. You need to be consistent while driving, and using braking markers as reference points for where you're braking or even turning in. Most people use reference points for where they start to turn in. That's also essential to basically, again, being consistent. That's the main thing you're trying to aim when you start sim racing. Be consistent. No need to be super fast in the early stages of racing. Just be consistent. So now we move on to drafting. Now drafting is a pretty simple concept. Essentially what it is there's a car in front and that car is pushing through a lot of air. Imagine the car is going like 300 k's an hour, 180 miles an hour roughly. It's pushing through a lot of air, and that air is trying to push it back, like it's trying to stop it from going faster. Now behind that car there's a little bit of a pocket where there's no resistance because that air has already been pushed through. It's usually, I think, in the 1 second range for GT cars, something like that. Now if you slot into that little pocket there, you don't have any air resistance, right? So your car doesn't have to push through that air, which means you can go faster. You have an overspeed. So you stay in that draft for a while, and then right as you're about to hit the guy's bumper in front, you move out and you still have a little bit of extra speed, maybe even to get past them. There is a second part of drafting, and it's called side drafting, where essentially you pull up alongside someone, and if you're overlapping a little bit, that car has to take on some of your air resistance as well. A video on V8 Supercars channel explains it really well. I'm not really good at explaining it. Either way, you slow the car next to you down, and as soon as you're side by side, you need to pull away because otherwise he's going to do the same thing to you and slow you down. So that's side drafting, but that's a little bit more complicated, and I'm not sure if all the sims have that. So now we finally get to jump into the simulator. Now I'm going to explain oversteer and understeer to you in hopefully a very efficient manner. We are on iRacing and in the Porsche GT3 Cup car around Spa. Now, none of that matters because this sort of applies to every situation that there is. Now, this isn't really a racing line, but let's just say I'm driving here. Now, what you need to look out for here is this rear wheel or this rear end losing traction. So here we go. I turned, let's just rewind a little bit, see here. I turned quite jaggedly. That's not good in the first place, but more importantly is that I stayed full throttle during this whole thing. This whole thing, I'm still full throttle. And what happens is I have about 500, 600 horsepower trying to push me forwards, and that's what the rear grip or the rear wheels are limited to. Their whole main aim is to try and push me forwards. Now, if I start turning, then the aim becomes to stop me from sliding out, essentially. The load gets transferred from the back here because I'm accelerating. As soon as I start turning, it goes to the outside, this part of the car here, and gets taken away from this inside here. Now, with this inside not having any load on it, it's going to lose traction. And that is going to, that load that also goes from the inside here, goes to the outside. And if that happens, you can't go full throttle because the rear tyre can only do so much. The outside tyre can only do so much. And that essentially means that once I overload this tyre, it's going to lose traction. And that's when I start spinning. There is a way to correct oversteer here. If you were watching my wheel, you could see that I tried to correct it there. But well, I guess you see that as well. That's oversteer for you. And now we're just going to move on to understeer. So if I slow-mo this, probably a little bit faster. I think that was a bit too slow before. Yeah, so here we go. I'm braking, I'm turning. But instead of just turning to what the front wheel's ability is, I'm turning way beyond what the front wheel can actually handle. Because again, the front wheel has to have a certain... Well, the front wheel is limited to a certain amount of grip. And if I go beyond that grip, that front wheel is going to start sliding, like you see right here. And you even see the tire mark of that front wheel and the inside front wheel as well. And you see that the car, if I go to... The car is not turning efficiently. The car is just sort of sliding out to the edge of the track. And that's not good. That's not what it's supposed to be. Even here, you'll see it even better. This inside wheel here is not gripping up. It's just sliding. The whole thing is just sliding. And as a result, there I go off track. So that's understeer for you. Just a quick recap. Oversteer is when the car starts over-rotating and the rear end wants to swing round. Understeer is when the car's not gripping up at the front and it's not turning properly and you just sort of slide forwards or straight rather than turning the corner. So I'm just going to explain pit entry and pit exit to you. So essentially, here at Lime Rock Park, we're coming around here. Oh, we need to go in for a pit stop. There's many different ways to enter many different pit lanes. For Lime Rock here, you just pull into here, you hit the brakes, and now there is a pit speed limit here. In most cases there is. And I have a pit limiter button on my steering wheel that I press to make sure that the car won't go over that speed and that I can basically push my foot down full throttle. Now if you're going into stop, then usually you pull into this lane here, which is the slow lane, and then you'll pull into that, into the slot here, and then once you come back out again, you pull into the fast lane, which is this one here, and you start accelerating, turn the pit limiter off, and then there's this line here. Now in some games, like I think Accelerator Corsa, you don't need to follow that line. You don't need to go or stay between these two lines here. You can just go over it. However, in iRacing, you do need to stay within the pit exit lines here. Otherwise, if you go over it in an online session anyway, you'll get a penalty. And that penalty is quite harsh. You've got to come back into the pit lane, drive through it at the pit speed limit, and you lose a heap of time. I think in Gran Turismo, you don't really need to do much except for go into the pit lane, select your tyres and do fuel, and then you're out again. So don't worry about that if you're in Gran Turismo. So that's pit entry and pit exit for you. So yellow flags. You'll probably be quite familiar with them if you've been watching a lot of racing previously or any form of motorsport. They usually mean something has gone wrong ahead, slow down, don't send it through there, and just sort of proceed with caution. There are safety cars in series like leagues, but you won't find them in stuff like official races, like on iRacing or in Gran Turismo or even ACC. I don't think they have a safety car procedure either. So safety cars are sort of irrelevant. Yellow flags just mean slow down, be aware of what's ahead of you. Don't just send it straight in, because that's what causes a lot of frustration for a lot of people, especially in iRacing. There's people who don't slow down for yellow flags, and it's horrific. They cause these massive pile-ups. If someone would just slow down, you'd be all good. You would be able to maneuver through the incident and be able to keep going. So yellow flags, slow down. Blue flags. Now in iRacing, there's usually a blue flag with a yellow stripe in the middle, going down diagonally. Usually it's just a blue flag anyway. That just means you're being lapped. Now on iRacing, or even just in sports cars, you don't have to really do anything. Just make sure you're predictable, you hold your line, make sure that you're not being all over the place trying to sort of let them through. Just hold your line. However, usually in stuff like F1, that means you need to completely get out of the way for the others to go through. Now in most cases, you'll be probably racing sports cars, so just try to sort of hold your line. Even if it's a faster class, you still hold your line, take the regular racing line, and the responsibility is of the faster driver to find a way around you. That's their responsibility, not yours. You just stay on your line, you just make sure you follow, just drive like you would if there was no car behind you. Obviously, don't turn in if he's already on the inside there. Don't do that. Just be predictable is what I'm trying to say. Be predictable and you'll be all good. Now we're going to get through to different starting procedures. Now this one's quite a funny one because there's many different ways to start on many different sims. I'm just going to go with the base one on iRacing, and I might dip into the other ones just for regulation sakes and so on. So, standing start, you've got about 5 or 6 red lights up the top, usually on your screen right in front of you. They'll each light up individually, and then once they go out, it's go, go, go. And how you launch, the way you launch is all up to you, but you just need to go forwards and focus on not crashing. Rolling start is usually used for sports cars, so the stuff that I like to race, and that is essentially you all line up together side by side, just like sort of like you would on a grid start as well, or a standing start. And usually either the leader has to go and then everyone else can follow, or the leader has to wait for the lights up top to go green, and only after that they can go. Those are the two different starting types that I regularly use. Now, if something's gone wrong on iRacing, like you missed the start, you can start in pit lane. So essentially, everyone has to go past you, and then your lights will go green, and you'll be able to exit out of pit lane in dead last, unfortunately, but that's just the way it is. In real life, pit lane starts usually reserved for some stuff like engine changes when you're not meant to do them, or parts changes when you're not meant to do them. And yeah, so it's just for it's a big penalty to start in pit lane just because everyone gets to go past you, even slower class cars. So now I'm just going to go through a bit of setting up your racing environment. Let's assume you've gotten the wheel, you've gotten the pedals, maybe even a rig, and you're ready to go. You just need to set up your physical environment and your virtual environment. So for your physical environment, you'll want your wheel roughly in front of you, and you'll have your arms in a sort of 90-degree position. That will allow you to have like enough rotation so you can turn the wheel all the way around and correct oversteer if you need, or even just turn around a pretty tight hairpin. In terms of pedals, that's sort of up to you. The seating position depends on the sort of car you're driving. So for an open wheeler, you usually sit quite low with the wheel quite high, but if you're in a GT car, you sit somewhat upright to be able to see out the car. And prototypes is a mix of in between open wheeler and GT. For display, if you're using a monitor or just what I started on was a laptop screen, that's where you sort of want to get the maximum resolution. Graphics isn't always important. It's nice to have, but honestly, prioritize FPS over graphics. You get much better racing with a higher FPS than you do with higher graphics. Force feedback settings. Now, there's a lot of sort of things you can do here. This all sort of depends on the simulator you're on. In iRacing, we have this little thing called the the force feedback gain. And essentially what it is, force feedback strength. Essentially what it is how much your wheel uses its capacity. So my wheel, the G29, has 2.7 Newton meters of torque, I believe, and you want that 2.7 Newton meters to kick in right as you're getting maximum rotation. So right as you're turning the most is when you want that maximum threshold to hit. So when you're turning as much as you can, that's when 2.7 Newton meters should kick in. Not before that, not after that. Well, I guess after that doesn't really matter, but usually you don't want it kicking in before that, because as soon as you're reaching the maximum force feedback that you've got on your wheel, that's losing feel in the road. Your wheel won't be able to react as well. You won't be able to vibrate for the stuff that's in the road, like the cracks and the curbs and whatever else you're going over. So make sure that however you set up your force feedback, you make sure that you only reach the maximum force feedback or the maximum force of your wheel once you're turning the most. Other than that, there's plenty of preference things out there. The most realistic settings are usually the stuff that's done by pro racing drivers. I'm not a professional at the moment. I'm just here trying to help you out for a pretty cheap price to get into sim racing without having to break the bank on some really expensive coaching sessions, of course. Yeah, so that's what you should set up for force feedback. Now, in terms of audio, if you're wearing headsets like me, then you'll be pretty set to go. There's not much to go out there. However, there is a little trick that quite a few of us sim racers use, and that's turning up the tire sound. So we reduce the engine sound by a little bit or just keep that the same, but either way, we amplify the tire sound. Some sims you can do it, so other sims you can't. It's a little bit like, I'm not unethical, but like it's a little bit controversial on whether that's realistic or not. But either way, it improves performance because you can hear a lot more detailed over the engine what the tires are doing. You can hear if they're sliding, if they've got micro lockups, or if basically what's happening to the car. So that's why we turn the tire sound just up a little bit to sort of know what we're doing. Now, we do have driver aids in some cars. So like in GT cars, we have ABS and traction control. Essentially what that is to stop you from spinning. So as I explained in the sort of oversteer, understeer sort of moment, mainly on oversteer is what you're looking at traction control. So to prevent you from going full throttle through a corner like that, remember, so you're turning and you're going full throttle to prevent the car from spinning, the traction control will limit either the throttle inputs, depending on the car, or the engine RPM. So it'll limit that, and that way you won't be able to sort of spin the tires up, and it'll sort of put the car back in place, or at least try to anyway. It depends on, there's plenty of settings you can play around with traction control. As for ABS, anti-lock braking systems, most cars have that nowadays. Traction control, most modern cars have that too. That's just there to stop you from hitting the brakes really, really hard and like stopping the wheels from moving, because wheels locked up, moving forwards, not a good way to stop. That's probably the least efficient way to stop, honestly. So yeah, that's just there to make sure your wheels are still moving. It's not always ideal to be inside of the ABS. You kind of want to be just on the limit. So right as you hit the brake, you want to feel a little, you won't feel it through the pedals unless you have really expensive ones, but right as you hit the brakes, you just want to have one click of ABS, pushing your pedal back a little bit, and then you want to sort of trail brake in from that. I'll explain what trail braking is a bit later, but essentially try to avoid ABS, but be right on the limit of ABS is what I'm trying to say here. And that's sort of what you need to know for setting up your driving environment. I'll go into more depth for the sort of assists and sort of different settings, in-car settings that you have in the paid part of the course. So if you want to head over to that, feel free. So that's the first module done. Congratulations, good job. You've made it this far, which means you've already been able to learn a few things about your driving. And so I hope to see you in module 2, and I'll see you on the other side. Welcome to the second module of this course. Amazing that you've made it this far. Give yourself a pat on the back, and we're going to get right into what we're going to cover in this module. So, understanding vehicle dynamics. That's very important to understanding how you should drive a car. Different cars handle differently, and that's where you need to learn, this car is going to do this if I do this to it, whereas if I do the same thing to another car, it's going to handle completely differently. So we're going to understand just sort of weight transfer and sort of the different things you can do to manipulate a car a certain way to get it to do what you want. Braking techniques. Braking's honestly probably my favorite part of racing, surprisingly. There's just so many different ways to do it and so many different techniques you can use to sort of get a bit of an advantage over the competition. Acceleration and throttle control is after that. That ties into a bit of oversteer, understeer control, like we covered just before. That's just going to be sort of how smooth you should be, and that ties in, of course, with the steering and smooth inputs. That's another part of this course. Another part of this module. That's just, smoothness is key, guys. That's key to being fast. Smooth is fast is what we have. It's a saying in racing. After that, we have mastering the racing lines. That's going to be a really cool one because we'll be in the sim just sort of jamming away. I'll be sort of letting you know what to do. in terms of defending a position, attacking, or just sort of the different situations you get throughout a race. So yeah, that'll be the last part of this module, the last part of the free community. After that, we have the paid community where you can access some more advanced stuff. And if you stick around to the end of this module, then you'll get a little bit of a freebie for the next one, the paid one. So make sure you stick around to the end, and I'll see you in the Understanding Vehicle Dynamics part. So we're back in the sim again. This time we're going to be talking about weight transfer and sort of again, vehicle dynamics. So I'm going to show you a clip here, and I'm pretty sure you're going to notice this, but what I've done with this setup is I've made it really high off the ground, and I've made sure that the suspension is really soft, just so I can like really show you what I'm talking about. So we're going to come here to turn 1, we're braking, and now look, I'm turning, oh well, actually I'm not turning, but essentially the car is turning in, now I am. And you see this side here is way lower to the ground. It's way more compressed on this side than this side. Now that's just the G-forces pushing the car this way. And because the car is being pushed this way here, the sort of suspension compresses because there's more load on that side of the car. Now, as we come out of this corner, I'll start accelerating, reducing my steering input. And now we're going to set the car up for this corner. And look what happens here. The moment I change direction, this side of the suspension compresses. And now the load is on the side of the car. So that's what you need to think about is when you're transitioning from corner to corner, you need to think about, oh, am I going to put too much momentum or too much weight onto this side of the car, or am I doing too little? You want to be on the very limit of, I guess, spinning out if you're in a sort of tight section, or like a medium speed section. You want to be transferring the weight just so that you don't spin out. Because eventually if you transfer the weight too much, or if you overdo it a little bit, you'll spin out. The weight will be too much for the tyres to handle, and just like that oversteer moment that I showed you, the car will spin around, or it'll just understeer depending on how you have the car set up. So that's the sort of the side to side thing. Now we're going to talk about the pitch of the car. Now with the pitch of the car, if you look here, we start braking roughly somewhere around here. There we go. Now did you see that? Watch this. The car goes from squatting backwards a little bit to leaning forwards. So, and then that's the weight that's being transferred over to this front left wheel here. So you've got the side to side, and then you've got the front to back, the pitch. And that combined usually puts a lot of the weight on one specific wheel. So at the moment, with me turning in here and braking at the same time, a lot of the load is on this front left wheel here. Whereas at the moment, or when I am braking, there is still load on this rear wheel here, this rear left wheel, but there's not as much because I'm still pushing the force, I'm still slowing the car down, which is sending the weight to the front. But as soon as I start accelerating, the rear will start to squat down again, and the front won't have as much grip anymore like it did under braking because there's less weight over those wheels. That's where the rear starts to pick up, and that's where you need to make sure only start accelerating when you're ready to unwind the steering. Because if you start accelerating while you still either have the steering straight or need to keep turning, either you're going too slowly and nothing happens, or you'll start understeering like crazy. Remember understeer? So the reason you understeer is because you're lifting the front of the car up when you're accelerating. So the front doesn't have as much grip, so the wheels are going to start sliding, and you're going to be like, oh, why is my car not turning? So only start accelerating when you need to unwind the steering and start setting up for either a next corner or setting up for the straight. So yeah, we're just going to, so its rear is squatting down a little bit again, not as much as it would on the front when I'm braking. And see, look at the way the side lifts up when I'm turning this way. And this is also not too much brake here, but there was a little bit, and you could see it dips just a little bit. and then we get the compression again. And so that's just a little bit of vehicle dynamics and sort of how a car handles when you treat it a certain way. So if you turn, the weight is going to go to the outside of the car. So if I turn left, the weight is going to go to the right of the car. And when I turn right, the weight is going to go to the left of the car. When I slow down, the weight is going to go to the front. When I slow down and turn left, it's going to go, and turn right, the weight is going to shift to the front left wheel. Just because I'm slowing down and I'm turning, that's where a lot of the weight is going to go. Not all going to go there, not all the wheels lift off the ground, but a lot of it is going to be there. So you need to be very careful that you're not overloading that tyre while you're braking and turning, because overloading that tyre will result in understeer as well. You can get understeer while you're accelerating as well as braking. So you need to make sure you're not overloading any of the tyres. You want to be right on the sweet spot, which is either a little tiny bit of slippage or just right about to start sliding. Now, I know I sort of explained this a bit earlier. However, I just wanted to go through the sort of traction thing again. And this is a good example here that I found. I was just doing laps and sort of seeing mistakes that I would make and sort of seeing if I could cheat something out of it. And this was a pretty good one that I sort of found is traction. You always want to be on the level of traction where you're in a corner. In a corner where you're just about to spin out. Like this, this is just if you're doing hot laps as well. But like, if you want to be fast, you want to be on the limit of traction where you're just about to spin out. And if something does go wrong, then you're going to spin out. Now, for endurance racing and stuff, obviously you tone it down a little bit because if something does go wrong, then you don't want that to happen. But this was a good example that I found here is I'm already on the maximum level of traction here, but I hit this curb and now the car is bouncing up and down and I'm not at the maximum level of traction anymore. So anytime I'm in the air, the car is not gripping on the track. It's just flying in a straight line or in a certain trajectory. And as a result of this bouncing here, I hop up onto the curb and the car starts bouncing around. As a result of that, I go just a little bit wide because I was on the limit already and I overstepped that limit. So as for traction, you'll be able to feel through your wheel whether you're on the limit or not, whether you're about to spin out. So just make sure that you're sort of, if you're trying to do hot laps, just be consistent and fast. Make sure that you're usually just on the limit of traction so that if something goes wrong, you are able to you're able to save it obviously, but yeah, if something small goes wrong and you like me bouncing off that curb and you already as a result of that go a little bit wide, you found pretty much the perfect part of perfect traction. And here again I was straight up into the curb, but because I'm not on the limit of traction there, I didn't go wide. So now we're going to go through a bit of sort of like what the role of suspension is in a race car. So all cars, I'd say all cars, but I'm sure there's going to be that one little car that doesn't have any suspension. All cars that I know of have suspension, and that includes race cars. Race cars usually have a lot stiffer suspension because you don't want the car rolling like crazy, because that's lifting grip up from the inside tyre that you don't want. That's lifting grip off from the inside tyre that you don't want. You want a very stable race car. Sometimes it's alright to have a little bit of roll that aids in a bit of control and sort of, depending on what track you're on. Like for Watkins Glen track, which is very long, sweeping corners and quite fast, I usually have the car quite stiff. But if you're on a really slow track, you might want it a bit loose so you can get a bit more rotation. Either way, I'm just going to show you an example of a car having suspension, I guess. So I go over this curb here. Oh, just see that. Look at that weight transfer there as well. The car is not that stiff. It's stiff, but so you see immediately the car changes the load from this side onto this side. And now as I go over this curb, you'll be able to see the car goes up. If we didn't have suspension in cars, that would have hurt a lot. And as a result of that, start to slide a little bit. But here as well, here's another perfect example. I absolutely eat these curbs here. And if a car, that would have been a broken back if we didn't have suspension. So that's sort of the role of suspension, to sort of keep the car handling or sort of somewhat the same over uneven surfaces like those curbs. I'm not sure if I hit it here. Yeah, well, there you go as well. I hit it there too, and this is where I have a bit of a moment. Yeah, but that's sort of the role of suspension, is to keep the car stable and sort of try to make it handle the same all the way around the track. Even if you hit a bump, it'll handle a little bit differently. Obviously, you can't tune everything out of the road, but it's sort of there to keep the car consistent with sort of your driving. At the same time, it can be used, if we go into the garage here, this will be a little bit more advanced in the more advanced section later on, but you can tune the suspension. So bump stiffness, if you hit a bump like I just did there, do I want that to be really stiff, or do I want that to be nice and loose so the car sort of floats over it? You've got rebound stiffness, so how fast or how hard does the spring or the damper rebound? Then you got the spring perch offset as sort of that's more for height, or sort of controlling the height of the car. The spring rate is how stiff the spring is that you have in there, as far as I know. And there's so many anti-roll bars. I'm not sure if that counts as suspension, but hey, let's say it is anyway. That's sort of a bar in the front and the back of the car that sort of controls the roll, like we were talking about before. The roll of the car, and for some tracks you'll want that quite soft, for other tracks you'll want that quite stiff. That depends on also your driving style too. I quite like stiff cars. Yeah, and then there's heaps of settings here that you can change on suspension to make the car suit the track, suit your driving style as well. But that's sort of the more advanced thing. I don't think you need to get into that right now. Just focus on the basics, and we'll move on to the next one. So now we get on to the sort of aerodynamic parts of things. This is a pretty interesting area for engineers, especially aerodynamicists. They're pretty into this stuff. I love aerodynamics. It's a pretty cool part of racing that we've sort of taken from aeroplanes and sort of the, I guess, aeronautical industry or whatever it's called. Let's get into it. We have a car moving forwards. The air travels over the car and out the back. That's pretty simple. There are little bits and pieces like a wing here that aids in pushing the car into the ground, because if you angle it a little bit forwards, the air that you get is going to be pushing against that, because the air is going straight and it sort of wants to push that rear wing back down. That's what's pushing the car into the ground, and that's how you get more grip from aerodynamics. Same with the splitter here. It's a little bit less, well, actually quite a lot less angled towards the front, but it's still a little bit angled towards the front to aid in pushing the car down into the ground and making sure that it sticks to the tarmac. Now this shark fin here is something you won't see in all cars. In fact, you won't see it in many cars unless you're driving prototypes, and sometimes open wheelers too. But essentially what that is, it's a straight board, and if the car starts getting a little bit loose, you start sliding a little bit, the rear, what that aims to do is the air wants to go straight. And if this piece here is not going straight, the air is going to try and push it back into position, back straight again. And so it'll aid in a little bit of cornering, because it'll be able to, it has that air pressure that's going through it or going around it, trying to push it back into place. So if you start sliding, usually a shark fin is a good way to save yourself. Now, there is such a thing as dirty air or aero wash, which means all the air that's gone over this car here is not going to be very, I guess, static, or not very clean for the car ahead. It's going to be all muddled up from all the vortexes that this has created, and all the sort of, again, the aero pocket that I explained in the earlier part of the course is like a lack of air behind the car. So if you're driving behind a very aerodynamic car like this one here, if you've got another 963 back here, this guy here is going to have a lot harder time driving behind me because of all the air that I've messed up for him. It's not a very nice feeling to drive in dirty air, because you're sort of noticing, oh, I don't have as much grip as I usually would. The car's not handling like it should. So sometimes it's a little bit better to sometimes back off a little bit so you can avoid the dirty air, or take a different alternating line to the car ahead, where you're making sure that you're still keeping up the same pace, but you're sort of avoiding the dirty air. And I've done a YouTube short on that if you want to go check that out at Suzuka. But yeah, that's another thing. The faster you go, the more downforce you have. Pretty simple explanation. However, sometimes in a corner, if you notice you're starting to slip out a little bit, maybe because you're going too slow. In GT cars, it's often not the case because they're not very aerodynamic, but these prototypes here, sometimes if you go faster, the corner's easier, right? It's just the way physics works. Obviously, there's also the limitation of tires. Tires can only do so much, so sometimes going faster is not the solution if you're already on the limit. But if you're noticing you're braking and then you're starting to struggle with the car a little bit, maybe brake a little bit less or a little bit later to make sure that you're still carrying quite a high minimum speed, and you might find the car stables out a little bit. So now we move on to braking. Now, braking is probably actually my favorite part of racing. There's so much to it. There's so much technique. It's so many ways you can manipulate the car through using the brakes. It's so good. I love it. And it's, even though it's slowing the car down, you want to go fast, but braking is honestly where the cool stuff happens usually. So we're going to focus on different braking techniques today, two of them specifically, just to help you get started. And then later on in the course, you can sort of look at more advanced stuff to get in there. But today we're going to focus on trail braking, threshold braking, and I'll talk a little bit about ABS and cars that don't have ABS, etc., what you do with them. So if we go into the sim here, we start playing this. Now you'll notice I start braking at some point. The main point of braking is to slow the car down for a corner, so to make sure I don't end up in this wall here. So I start braking somewhere around here, and this is trail braking. So I nearly hit max pressure there, and then I slowly start bleeding off the brakes. Now don't worry about the throttle here, that's just the electronic blip. And so I keep bleeding off slowly, and then as I start turning in, I'll bleed off the brakes completely. Now the reason you do that is the tires have the front tires, have a certain amount of grip that you give them, or that they have, Tires have a certain amount of grip. You can't exceed that grip limit, otherwise the ABS kicks in, or you lock up in a car without ABS. So how do we go about that then? So what you're trying to do is, if you're braking, you're using 10 out of 10 grip from those tires. That's fine, just make sure you don't turn, because if you start turning and you start loading the tires up with different things, say you're turning, or you're braking at 10 out of 10, and you're turning at 2 out of 10 or 3 out of 10, that means you've gone 13 out of 10. That means the tires don't have the grip anymore to turn, so they're either just lock up and you'll go straight, or ABS will kick in and it won't be very smooth, it won't be very nice. So what you're trying to do is you reduce the braking based on how much you're steering or how much turning grip you're using. So if you're using more turning grip, that means you can't use as much braking grip. And that's what you're trying to do, is make sure that you don't lock up the wheels, don't do anything funny with the ABS. Another good reason we do this is you're trying to shift the weight from the front of the car to the middle of the car before you start accelerating, and then to the back of the car once you do start accelerating, very smoothly. You're not trying to come off the brake, because the moment you come off the brake, the weight of the car goes backwards or towards the middle if you're not accelerating. And that means the front tires don't have much weight on them, which means they don't have much grip on them. And so if you're turning and you immediately come off the brakes, you're just going to understeer. Remember, understeer, we just go straight, and the wheels are front wheels are not gripping with the track properly.
And you don't want that because it's not a very efficient way to turn. So that's why we do trail braking. If we move forwards a little bit here, you'll see that I do it for this corner here too. Nowhere near as much, but it's still there. So I hit the brakes, and then as I start turning, I'm getting less and less brake. There you go. And then as I start accelerating, I do less and less steering. And that's trail braking for you. Now, if we fast forward a little bit more, we'll go into threshold braking. Now, this Porsche has ABS. That's fine. ABS is good for being somewhat consistent. However, you don't want to constantly hit the ABS, or you don't want to constantly be in the ABS. So for those of you who don't know, I'm sure most of you know, but ABS is a system. It stands for anti-lock brake system. As soon as it notices the wheel is stopped and you're still moving forwards, it's going to release the brake and sort of like vibrate on it's going to release the pad from the disc and push it back on and make sure the wheel still keeps moving. Now, ABS is good for noticing when you should start lifting off the brake, because it's basically telling you, hey, you've gone over the limit just a little bit, that's all good, but you should probably start letting off now, because otherwise you're going to not have a very smooth entry and the tires are going to overheat. Because what ABS is doing is essentially, if it's in a tire sort of way, it's releasing and clamming the disc again, which means the tires are doing the same motion. They're vibrating a little bit, and you don't want that, because that sort of vibration really overheats the tires, and an overheated tire is a tire that's not gripping to the track properly. In a car without ABS, like an open wheeler or a prototype, most prototypes don't have ABS. I'm sure someone will pop up saying, hey, this prototype is ABS. Most prototypes don't. You sort of, I guess you have to lock up at least once to find the limit of where you can brake and where you can't brake. So if you lock up, you know, hey, I need to reduce my brake pressure a little bit. And this is what threshold braking is. In this car here, I don't go to 100% because I know if I do go to 100%, I'm going to go into the ABS way more than I really should. I'm just going to tap into the ABS just a little bit, and then I'm going to start coming off the brake. With a car without ABS, if you go a step over that line, you start locking up, and that overheats the tires like crazy. Flat spots them, not in the sim though, but in real life it does flat spot the tires, and you get really bad vibrations, and it gets worse and worse and worse. Don't need to worry about that for the sim though. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to find the ultimate sort of grip level for braking, and it's not at 100%. Even in GT3 cars with ABS, this grip level is not at the braking grip level is not at 100%. What you're really looking for is when the tire is just slightly moving a little bit slower than the car is moving forward, but it's not locked up, it's just moving a little bit slower. It's rotating a little bit slower than what the car is moving. That way you're making sure that you're not locking up, but you're also making sure that the tire is actually trying to push back against the car because it's already under rotating compared to what the car is going at. So you want to find the balance between not locking up, but not braking too little. And that sort of, we call it a micro lockup, where sometimes it'll, in like a Porsche Cup car, it'll be just, you can hear it, because this is why I love Porsches, because the gearbox, you can hear the straight cut gears in a Porsche. If we go into the cockpit here, you can hear that whining sound is the straight cut gears. And you can hear when the wheels are starting to shudder a little bit, and when the rear wheels are starting to sort of, I don't know, just sort of start micro lock up, and that's when you know this is the optimum braking point. I need to start lifting off now. Now, in terms of downforce, this is also pretty important. You need to essentially make sure that you're braking to the car's ability. Again, the tires, but the downforce also plays into this a little bit, because as mentioned before, when the sort of aerodynamic section of the course, air is going over this car quite quickly and really pushing it into the ground. And the slower you go, the less air is pushing that car into the ground. And if there's no air pushing that car into the ground, there's less grip because the tires aren't being pushed into the ground as hard. So you need to make sure that you're also braking according to what the aero is. So in a GT3 car doesn't play as much of a role. We do have little canards on the side here, and it's designed quite well, a splitter too. But in stuff like open wheelers with front wings and prototypes with massive wheel arches and sort of the bumpers that they have to push the car into the ground, you need to make sure that you're lifting off a little bit in a straight line, or quite a bit in a straight line, as well as turning in. Because if you're not lifting off in a straight line, the grip is going to get less and less, and you can maintain the brake pressure. It's just going to lock up anyway, no matter if you're braking at like 100%. If you're braking 100% and the car's slowing down, that's good, but you can't stay at 100% because the grip level is going to get less and less and less, and eventually you're going to lock up. If you're braking at 80%, it's still the same. It's just going to lock up later. So what you're looking for is lift off the brake a little bit in a straight line in a GT car. In an open wheeler with a high downforce car, lift off quite a bit more in a straight line, and then when you're turning in, lift off as in trail brake accordingly. But what you're really looking for is getting the maximum you can out of the tyres, making sure that you're not locking up, you're not hitting the ABS. Again, the ABS is all right. It's there. It's more. I see it more there as to let you know that, hey, you've reached the maximum braking ability now of the tyres. Lift off a little bit. With open wheelers, you don't have that. That's all good. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about smooth steering inputs. Why do we need them? Well, I'm just going to show you a lap here in my Porsche GT3R. It's not going to be a very long one, so this is around Lime Rock Park. Now, what I want you to pay attention to is my steering and my throttle. Actually, pay attention to the brake as well. Just look at the inputs. So we brake, and now I'm back and forth on the wheel. We call this seesawing, is what it is. And I need to lift off the throttle. Now, this is obviously a very bad demonstration of driving, and obviously I did this on purpose, but it's to show you how bad or how much slower steering like this is. This is a very extreme example, but essentially there's people that drive like this. I used to drive like this as well. Seesawing's not a great way to drive. It's very inconsistent. You can see here I go wide at the apex. Now I'm going to take you through one of my clean laps, or my fastest lap actually. And so we come into turn 1, brake, do lose a little bit of the ABS there, just because I went up on the curb, but we're nice and smooth. There are slight corrections in the wheel. There you go. I corrected some oversteer there, but that's all good. Like, the main point is just to be nice and smooth. And the reason we do this is if we seesaw all the time, back and forth, what we're doing is we're overheating the rear tires because front tires, because we're turning them, not turning them, turning them, not turning them, and eventually, again, as I've mentioned before, a hot tire is a tire that's not using its maximum grip to drive the car. Come around here, we just lift a little bit, we don't need to go wide like we did before. So yeah, the reason I'm explaining this to you is smooth inputs are key. Smooth is fast. I think there was a saying I read earlier today, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Just focus on the smooth is fast part. That's the most important part. And this is because when you're smooth, you're nice and consistent, you're easy on the tires, you're not overheating them, not overusing them, not getting more wear on the tires than you need, as well as you're not unsettling the car. Because if you seesaw back and forth in the middle of a corner, the car's trying to turn, then it's trying to not turn, then it's trying to turn again, and then it's not going to turn. And the weight transfer, remember we talked about weight transfer? It's all over the place. It's really not a good way to turn. So if you turn in a smooth manner, smooth is fast. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about oversteer as well, and the sort of correction you can do here. So I had a bit of a moment when I came, let's fast forward a bit here. So here I brake, and I braked a little bit too much there. Actually, let's go out to the chase view. I braked a little bit too much there, and you can already see the rear wheels are about to give way here. And now see what I did there? If we play it in slow motion, I started turning the other way, and then I made sure that while I was turning the other way, before the car snaps back to this way here, I turn the steering straight again to make sure it doesn't snap the complete other way and then I get sent into a spin anyway. So counter steering, this is called counter steering. Counter steering is basically you let the wheel, you sort of let the wheel counter steer by itself, and that'll put the car back into a little bit of a drift. But you need to make sure that you spin the wheel back before the car starts spinning the other way, because what you're essentially doing with counter steering is you're telling the car to go this way. It's just going to take a little bit longer because it's already in the slide. But as soon as it regains rear grip, it's going to turn the other way, and then you're going to slip around the other way. That is counter steering for you. Let's have another look at it. No throttle input, nothing. I'm just making sure that the car stays straight, or making sure that the car stays on track and that I don't spin. Now, why did I even get into this moment here? Well, what I believe it is that I carried in way too much, well, not way too much, but a bit too much speed, and because a Porsche is the Porsche, has the engine in the back, the weight transfer wasn't very smooth, and you can see here, there was already a little bit of a moment here. There we go, yep. That's already one bit of oversteer there. And then that leads into a bigger moment of oversteer. So here we go, now we're actually sideways. And then you turn the wheel back and you're all good to go. Obviously, you don't want to do this all the time. Every now and then in practice is fine. It's good to learn the limit of the car, and it's also very good for maybe you get into a situation where you're hit by someone else and you start oversteering. You know, hey, I know exactly what to do here. I just need to turn the wheel this way and bring it back before the car snaps the other way, and I'm all good. That's just the basics of oversteer. Now, hand positioning. I've already explained this a little bit before in part of the other module, but to go through it again, just to make sure that you know it, hands are at the 9 and 3 position. That's where they should be, that's where they should stay. If you're turning and you just turn the wheel and you leave your hands like this, you could be turning, but your hands are like this. And eventually you're going to lose track of, well, not eventually, but at some point you might lose track of where the wheel is. But if you just keep your hands like this the whole time, then you know exactly where the wheel is. I know that I'm turning the wheel 180 degrees. I know that the car's turning right now. I know that the car's not turning right now because my hands are straight. And that's sort of the very, it's not what you're taught when you drive a road car, for example. You're taught to have your hands at 10 and 2. I honestly don't know why they teach you that, because 9 and 3 is way better for controlling the car. You have a lot more range than 10 and 2. However, I mean, I drive my road car with 9 and 3, but however you drive your road car is fine. But in a race car, you need your hands at 9 and 3. That's the only way you're going to really advance, because you know you're intact with the car. You're not. It's almost like you're separated from the car if you turn the wheel, if you shuffle the wheel through your hands, because you're just staying the same, but the car is moving. Whereas if you're turning actively and making sure that your hands are going with the wheel, you feel a bit more connected to the car and you're able to react a lot quicker because you already have your hands in the position that they need to be. So if you catch oversteer, for example, you don't need to shuffle the wheel back through your hands. You know exactly, hey, turn back and then return the wheel so I don't snap back. That's the sort of hand positioning thing. There's not much else to turning. Again, you need to sort of work it together with the brakes and the throttle. It all goes together in one. You turning by itself is an element to turn the car, but to turn the car properly, you also need the brake and the throttle. Brake and throttle aren't just there for accelerating and braking. They're there to help rotate the car in certain ways. If you want it to go through a certain corner one way, then you rotate it this much with the throttle or this much with the brake. If you want it to go through another different type of corner, you rotate it this much with the brake and throttle. There's many different ways to manipulate a car, and that's what I'll teach you in this sort of premium stuff of this course. So yeah, that's the basics on steering. We'll move on to the next part of this module. Alright, now we're going to get into sort of the acceleration things, the throttle control, and sort of managing wheel spin, shifting gears, sort of part of the thing, or part of the course, sorry. So, I've chosen the V8 Supercar for this because it's a very, very good example. It's very difficult to drive this car. There's no traction control, there's no ABS, there's no anything aside from maybe roll bar, anti-roll bar adjustments in the car. Remember we talked about that. So yeah, it's a very difficult car to drive. It's got 600 plus horsepower, quite skinny tyres, we could say. Not a lot of aero, quite boaty as well. So I'm going to talk about throttle control here. Why do we need it? So ideally, when you're accelerating, you don't have any wheel spin, because all the energy that's going into spinning the wheels is not energy that's being used to push the car forward. So therefore, you're not accelerating at maximum efficiency. In addition to that, it's really bad for the tyres if you keep spinning the wheels when you're coming out of a corner, and it's very easy to just whoop, round you go and into the wall. Remember we talked about oversteer. Now, when I did that example at Spa, that was exactly what happened. I pushed the throttle down all the way, turned the steering wheel all the way to the right, and I started spinning the wheels, and eventually I came round. So that's the same that happened. Well, this is the same thing happens pretty much in every car if you do it hard enough. So yeah, I'm going to take you through a bit of a lap here. The V8 Supercar has a very fine point for. The Holden anyway. The Holden has a very fine point for where the power kicks in. It's almost like a turbo car, so if you know anything about turbo lag, it stays, the car doesn't feel anything until about 4,000 or 5,000 RPM, and then immediately there's like a whole bunch of power that kicks in, and suddenly you go get a jolt of power, get pushed back into the seat, or there's wheel spin. So you'll see down here my pedal. Keep an eye out for the throttle, the green one. And we're just going to go through this lap. So I brake here. Don't worry about the lips, they're needed for this car. A little bit wobbly on entry, but now look at my throttle. It's very, very smooth. I barely get to full throttle. And then slowly start accelerating again, and I lift off to make a corner, and then start accelerating. There we go, now we're full throttle. And then we start braking again. And once again, I'm taking my time to get to full throttle. Even there, I'm still lifting off a bit because I know the wheel's going to spin. Here again, I'm going to take my time, making sure the car doesn't spin out. And then here, not so much, but yeah, well, I'm still taking my time to get on throttle. Now, what you want is not a on and off and on and off, because what that does is it lifts the front of the car up, it puts it back down on the ground, then lifts it back up again, puts it back on the ground, and that's very inconsistent. So you're going to get snaps of understeer, and then it's going to be very inconsistent. It creates, it's not good for tyre wear either, because you're pushing pressure on the rear tyres and then taking it off, and then pushing it on and taking it off. In addition to that, it's very inconsistent, and it's not a good way to drive. So what you're looking for is mainly, when you're accelerating, just a smooth curve. Now, V8 Supercar or the Holden is a very extreme example of that. Most cars you're alright with, like if we go through the turn... Oh, okay, no, sorry, that's not what you were meant to see. Here we go. If we go through this section here, at this point you can usually be about full throttle with any other car. And same here. As you start accelerating out here, usually about full throttle here. This car you can't do that just because it's such a boat and it's got so much power with very skinny tyres. And that's sort of this is a very extreme example, but the same thing, the same principle remains. You still need to be very smooth on throttle, make sure that you're not spinning the rear wheels up, and making sure that you're being nice and consistent, not oversteering too much anywhere, not understeering by going on and off the throttle. It's an art, I guess. So we in sim racing, we don't have the feel of the car in our bums like we would in a real car. And that's what we need to, that's why we turn the tyre sound up, is so I can hear the tyres sort of like, are they about to spin up? Yes. Well, either I should shift up a gear or I should lift off the throttle a little bit and make sure that I'm not going to spin up the rear tires. Now, the reason I said shifting up a gear is because there's a technique called short shifting. It's used in, it depends on which car you want to use it in. It's very good in the rain. But remember how I said at about 1,000 to about 5,000 RPM, there's not a lot of power. Well, if there is too much power at about 6,000 RPM, I can just shift up a gear and suddenly I'll regain traction because there's not a lot of power between that 4,000, 5,000 range and it kicks in again at the 6,000 range. So ideally what you're doing with short shifting is trying to keep traction going, and the higher up the gears you go, the faster your speed is, the less likely you are to spin up the wheels because you're already traveling at such a high speed. So if I go short shift from second to third, I'm less likely to spin up the wheels in third because I'm already traveling at a higher rate of speed than I would be in second. So I'm accelerating at a slower rate. And that's sort of the basics of the sort of throttle control. There's not much else to it. It's quite simple. Just make sure that you're not oversteering, making sure that you're keeping the car under control. See here, just so slow to get onto the throttle, and even there I lift off a bit because I realized, hey, I know this car, the wheels are going to spin up, so let me lift off just a tiny bit to make sure that doesn't happen. Yeah, but again, V8 Supercar is a very extreme example. You probably don't need it as much in GTs, or because you also have traction control there, but that's a different story. Yeah, so hold on, this is a very not happy part. Yeah, that's the basics of throttle control. We'll move on to the next part of this course. Alright, now we're going to talk a little bit about racing lines. Well, the key to racing, really. Brakes and racing lines, that's what it's all about. And some throttle application goes into there too. So I've done a lap around Spa, mainly because, well, Spa is sort of the track that has a lot of variation in the corners. It has really fast corners, really slow corners, and everything in between. So we're going to go through a lap of Spa and I'm going to explain my racing line to you. So let's jump on here. Now, this is in the P2 car. Now this is a hairpin, so it's, in this case, it's not quite a 180 degree rotation where you go all the way back around again, but it is a very tight corner. So for a tight corner with a very long straight after it, you want to have a very late apex. So you notice I don't start turning in anywhere here. I turn in really, really late. I turn in right around here. This is where I start turning in. And now this is to maximize my exit. So you can see already before I'm hitting this apex here, I'm already getting on throttle. So yeah, I've slowed down here and now I'm already getting on throttle before I've even hit the apex. Now this is because there's a massive, massive straight after this that goes on for ages. And that's the reason you want to get on throttle so early. So a late entry with a really early throttle application will be nice, well, set you up for the straight really well. Now, Arouge is sort of really basic in a car like this because it's flat completely, so there's not much you need to know. But what you do try to do in a faster car where you've got a corner that's flat out, you want to take the line with the least resistance. So you want to basically turn as little as you can, and that's what I've done here. I've made sure that I don't turn in really late because that would scrub the tyres and get me into a little bit of understeer. And I'm making sure that I'm following a nice line through here and making sure that I'm not trying to push the wheel anywhere where it doesn't want to go. I'm just trying to flow with the track. And I'm just trying to take the path that's the shortest. At the same time that it's short, it's also the least resistant. Meaning that if you do turn, the tyres aren't going to slow you down, because that's what happens in these high downforce cars. It's getting pushed into the ground so much that if you turn, the tyres are going to, we call it scrubbing. And scrubbing is what happens when you start turning in a high-speed corner and the tyres just don't really have the grip to keep up with that sort of speed. So you sort of, it's like mini understeer, I guess. and it's so it slows you down, and that's what you try to avoid in like these high downforce cars. Now, turn 1 at Spa, the one we just talked about, is a single corner. That is one corner by itself, and after that there's a long straight. This here has multiple corners. Glecom has multiple corners. So what we're going to do here is I have a pretty normal entry because this is nearly a 90-degree corner. And then we hit the apex here. And now instead of going all the way out here, like you would in a regular corner, you sort of want to keep it tight here, because you can see here, I did get a bit of oversteer there. Yeah, but you sort of want to keep it a little bit tighter so that you can make sure that the entry to this corner is set up perfectly, because the moment you wander out to this part of the track and then you need to turn to this corner, you need to take a much slower, you need to be a lot slower, because you won't be able to sort of cut through like I'm doing here. If I took this line here, I'd have to slow down a lot more, because again, that's the racing line. The racing line is maximizing speed while shortening the distance. This would just be taking the shortest distance, so I'd have to go really slowly. So that's why you sort of cut across here. And so a general rule for this, if there's a left corner and then the right corner afterwards, you usually want to go to the middle of the track on the exit of the first corner, so you can set up the second corner perfectly. And that sort of guarantees that it finds a balance between getting a good exit out of one corner but also not sacrificing the entry for the next corner. So if there's one corner after another, like left right, so you enter perfectly fine like that, but make sure you don't go out too wide, don't take a regular exit. Make sure you get a nice entry for the next corner as well. I did get a bit of oversteer there, that's fine. And now this is that was very slidey. That's my sort of style. But the principle's still the same. You can see I go right to the outside there, and then I'm oversteering, but that's all good. I go right to the outside there, come into the middle of the track, or come to my apex, which is right here in the middle of the corner, and then I start to accelerate out and slide out to the exit. Now this is a double apex corner. Now a double apex, let me see if I can find a better view of this. Now a double apex essentially is what it sounds like. You have two apexes in one corner. So I'm just going to show you what that looks like here. I hit this apex here, I go out wide a little bit, and then I come back in. Actually, to be honest, that wasn't you couldn't see much of it, but if we go to something like the chase cam, you'll be able to see I go out a little bit wide again, and then I come back in. And what that allows you to do is you don't have to follow the inside line the whole time, so you can it's sort of the same principle as a hairpin. That's mainly the goal, is maximizing the exit. So you come in, and instead of following the line all the way around the corner and having to accelerate a little bit later because you're at a slower speed, what you can do is come in with a bit more speed. Instead of having to brake a lot more, you can come in with a lot more speed and then eventually drift out wide a little bit, and then you come back in. And because you're on a certain angle, if I didn't do that, my car would be pointing a little bit more to the outside and I'd have to wait longer to accelerate. So the aim of a double apex is to be able to accelerate earlier. And that's what I'm doing here. Again, I'm accelerating before I've even hit my second apex. And that's the point of a double apex corner. Now, because these two corners here are so far apart, I don't need to sacrifice the exit of this corner here. I can go right out wide, and then I can go out wide here again, tap of the brakes, same as every other racing line. It's a 90-degree corner. I'll get a bit of a slide there, that's all good. That's another basic racing line. Now, so that Puhon can be considered as two corners. It's really opinionated, but let's call it one corner. So it's another sort of double apex. I go right out wide to the curb, double apex here, so you hit it once and then you hit it twice. However, in this case, I'm full throttle through most of it, except for when I'm obviously braking for the corner. Yep, so full throttle, and now this is where the line of least resistance comes in. Usually, if I was carrying a bit more speed, I wouldn't go all the way to the inside here, because I'm pushing the car to where it doesn't want to go. You can go a little bit wider, and that way you're not getting as much resistance, and therefore you get a little bit more speed. And now this is quite nice here. Exactly the same as I explained before. Nope, that's not the one. Here we go. Exactly the same as I explained before. It is a 90-degree corner again. So what you do is you hit the brakes, you come into the apex, which is a little bit later for this one, and then instead of accelerating all the way out to this part of the track here and getting a good exit through here, I make sure to sort of exit to the middle of the track and then set up the entry for the next corner. So I'm not compromising one of the corners. I guess I'm compromising two corners, but at a lower rate. So I'm not completely compromising one corner to get a good corner for the next one. I'm just compromising both a little bit to make sure that I can take both at a better speed. And now this is classic 90-degree corner again. Come in and accelerate out to the edge of the track. And this is another one here. So, I keep talking about the path of least resistance. What I could have done here is I could have turned in much earlier. I could have started turning in about here and sort of hit the apex here. But instead of doing that, I took the path of least resistance and I had a really late apex here. Now that's because, again, if you have some resistance through scrubbing the tires, that means that you're not maximizing the speed through a corner, and that means that even if your foot's flat, you're going to be slower than someone else who's taking the path of least resistance. And it's the same here. Rather than going to the inside here and traveling the shortest distance, and I reckon I could take this flat if I did go along the inside here, but instead of doing that, I make sure to go to the outside of the track and treat it like a regular corner. Even if there's no braking, try to treat it like a regular corner and find the path of least resistance. And then we hit the brakes, and chicanes are quite an interesting one because there's very different ways to take it, but I take it by the principle that I'm teaching at the moment, and that is make sure you exit to the middle of the track and set up the entry for the next corner. So yeah, that's really the basics on racing lines. So remember, single apex, late entry is for tight hairpins, like the one that we were just about to see. I think I actually go a little bit wide on this lap. Yeah, just a little bit, but that's all good. So that's, again, late apex. Early apex is if you have quite a lot of space on the exit to use. So imagine, it's a really tight entry, but on the exit there's heaps of space. So you can really hit an early apex and get a nice exit if you have heaps of space on the exit. Then we have the double apex, which is again hitting the corner or hitting a apex twice. So you hit that one apex and then you go around and then you hit the second apex to get a better exit. Same principle as the sort of late apex theory. So take the path of least resistance, make sure that you're not scrubbing the tires too much when you're flat out. So yeah, that's really the basics of racing lines. It'll give you a bit of actually quite a huge advantage over the competition if you know this. But something else to know is always go to the edge of the track. So rather than me hanging around the middle here and just fooling around, I make sure that you can see here I'm on the white line. We're ready to brake. Make sure you maximize your track usage. Maximize the availability of the sort of track limit. So rather than, I actually didn't do it quite too well here, but I can go all the way out if I took it differently, I can go all the way out for my outside wheels, or for my right hand side wheels to be on this curb. Yeah, so make sure you use the track. Remember double apex, late apex, early apex, and neutral apex. So that's the basics of racing lines.
So that was the end of the free part of the course, Speed Accelerator Lite. Feel free to hang around in the community, ask questions. I'll still be there to answer your questions every now and then. For those of you who go on to do Speed Accelerator Pro, you will have access to my DMs 24/7. That might change depending on how popular this course gets. So get in quick, because the price will go up eventually. It's $30 right now for a month. It will go up eventually. You guys who start off paying $30 will stay at $30. That's all good. I'm not going to increase the price for you, but if you join later, the price will be higher. Now, what we're going to cover in the Speed Accelerator Pro is really the driving part of things. So saving tires, saving fuel, making sure that you know how to overtake properly, some proper etiquette of racing, because sometimes it can get a bit heated and you do need to know when to apologize, when to communicate, etc. So yeah, that's what we're going to cover in the paid part of the course. I hope to see you there, and I hope to see you on track.